most of my professional career was in finance and accounting, and I usually don't like to start off with that because people think, if you're a numbers guy, you don't know how to write. But I've always been interested in writing my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of came naturally when I moved into semi-retirement. And I wanted to put together a book that was unique in the sense of having multiple perspectives about a particular topic. And so I've profiled 4 different people, an advocate, somebody who started a nonprofit, someone who's a law enforcement officer, a survivor, and then a brothel madam's story of redemption. And you don't see a lot of that all in one book. And
Right.
what I wanted to do was to write really interesting stories so you could almost learn something and not even realize you learned it by the time you got to the end, because you're hopefully engrossed in the story and you want to find out what happens next. But it's about stuff that I think a lot of people don't have a lot of background on. And then I ended the book with tips for parents, what you can do as an average citizen, some practical things, and I'd like to talk more about that as well.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that for sure. That's I think that's the thing most people are really interested in. They hear about the topic and they want to dig into that, but when they're kind of done with it, it's like, okay, what can I do with this information? So you have some really good stuff. I wanted to make sure that I said I was really drawn when I heard your story about that. Somebody wanting to, if they won the lottery, they would go out and they would, go out and try to end trafficking. I know that I watched another piece with you and you kind of brought that up. How did that affect the way that you felt about trafficking, what you wanted to do, I guess, with your writing?
Yeah, so I was in the beginning stages of writing my first book a couple years ago, which is It's Not About the Badge.
Mm-hmm.
Which was the human side of policing. And I typically ask an officer, tell me about a day on the job you'll never forget. And I got a lot of really interesting and different answers as to why this was an extraordinary day for them, even though crime-wise it might not have been all that unusual. Mm-hmm. And I always have a series of questions when I'm interviewing somebody. And so I ended the interview by just asking a bunch of random questions. And one of them was, hey, if you won the lottery, what would you do?
Right.
And I got an answer I wasn't expecting. I was expecting, well, I'd buy a house on the lake and go fishing every day. And this particular gentleman, Jesse Cortez, said that he would quit his job and hunt down human traffickers. And it really sort of stuck with me for a long time. And at that point, I was thinking, I gotta remember to do that. Maybe that's what I'll do my second book on. And as I was getting ready to think about my second book, I came back to that thought and that comment, and I realized that I don't know a lot about human trafficking. I've seen a few headlines. There's been some movies, but it was very surface level. And the more I thought about it, I kept thinking, that's probably one of the most evil things that someone can do to another human is to traffic them. And so that was kind of the start of the journey of wanting to write this book. And as I went through that journey, I learned a lot, and I realized there's a lot of misperceptions and a lot of things that people don't know. And one of those things is that this happens in the suburbs, in small towns, rural America. I think people see headlines about on the border or large cities, Los Angeles and New York, and that's absolutely true. That absolutely happens. But I wanted to focus on stories where people initially are going to say, "Oh, that doesn't happen in my town. I live in a nice neighborhood.
Right.
My kids go to a good high school." And the more I researched it, the more I found out that, well, you might think that this child or your kid's friends are not at risk, but in actuality, there's in suburban America as there is in the places that get more press. So I wanted to focus on stories that were in areas that people would be a little bit surprised about.
I'm glad you told me all that stuff. I had a question written down about talking about those myths and everything. So you totally rolled into that. So for anybody that's watching this right now, it's possible that we're gonna get into some stuff that may trigger you. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about human trafficking. So when I started my journey, and I don't know how this happened to you, John, but when I started learning more about it, I could maybe watch a documentary, and then I had to take a couple of days off, and maybe I could read a book, and then I had to, just get away from the topic. So I want people to know that if they're full, they should just take a break and come back to this a little bit later. Maybe you can give us, as you had gone and started learning more about trafficking, can you give us that are all here kind of a simple definition of human trafficking so we can kind of get our bearings?
Sure. So the accepted definition is that where you've got force, fraud, or coercion. And human trafficking really takes two different forms. There's labor trafficking and there's sex trafficking. My book focuses on the sex trafficking. There's definitely different demographics. And a lot of people believe that labor trafficking is actually more prevalent, but gets a lot less press than an arrest on a sex trafficking ring or something like that. So I don't really focus a lot on the labor trafficking, but it's definitely out there, and it is something that's just as bad, because you get people in a kind of a debt servitude, and they just can't get out of it, and they may be isolated on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And when I do some of these presentations and talks, I do talk a little bit about labor trafficking, because it's also a problem that I could write a whole book about that, and that doesn't get hardly any press at all. But in my book, I focus mostly on situations that happen to underage teens and children and such, and I think that just sort of struck me as something that I need to write about this. I need to talk about it, and the first part is getting awareness for people.
Yeah, I was particularly struck by the story in there by about the girls that were being affected and helped by Janelle, the counselor, and the kind of
Yes.
trials that she went through. So my takeaway from that was that she realized that if she was going to start working with trafficking victims, it was going to be more than a 9-to-5 job. And eventually she decided to kind of step out and do this on her own and provide more direct care for these girls. Maybe you could explain, why it was that this wasn't an 8-to-5 job or 9-to-5 job, for her, or just expand upon that story any way you want to.
Sure. So Janelle really started out as a counselor, and then really felt a calling to help these kids. And a lot of the stuff that happens, the chaos in their life, it happens after 5 o'clock at night. It's not happening when it's convenient. And as a case manager, what she does is navigate for her clients all the systems and nonprofits that are out there. So it could be the foster care system, it could be the criminal justice system, as well as if it's a kid who's been trafficked when they were 14 or 15, how do they go back to get their GED in high school? And so there isn't just one agency that does all that. So she's become an expert in helping navigate all of those systems, all the various nonprofits that are out there. And she lives in the suburbs or works in the suburbs of Denver. And to me, that was from a literary perspective, I wanted to talk about what's happening in the suburbs. And two of the stories are really important. One of them is the way that predators will find kids, and this is through an online chat room in gaming. And in today's world, every application, and it doesn't matter whether it's Facebook, Snapchat, or games, they all have some kind of messaging or chat capability. And so the story really shows how this um, perpetrator wanted to groom this kid, and they're not snatched off the streets.
Right.
The kidnapping stats for trafficking is 3 to 5%. It's really low. And most of the time it happens through someone that and that could be a friend, family member, friend of the family, etc. And so I wanted to show this story of how this person was trapped by being, kind of groomed online and then turned to drugs. And once the predator got this girl on drugs, he had, complete control to manipulate her.
Right.
And so that was, and that's a very real thing. You hear that a lot, because if you have a teenager that's on drugs, they're going to be, by definition, more vulnerable, and also by definition easier to manipulate. And that's what these guys do. I've talked to multiple police officers, and if you're a predator, you're not just contacting one person on, say, a gaming chat room or a gaming
that's right.
application. They're sending out 100, and maybe 5 of them reply, and then they zoom in on the ones that are replying. And so that was part of this story. And another big piece of Janelle's story was somebody who was actually living at home, recruited at a high school by an older friend, and then just was used and manipulated by this older boyfriend. And what that's commonly referred to as a Romeo pimp. So somebody who starts out trying to build a relationship, and that can take months. I mean, I've heard stories of where they just meet at a Starbucks. Somebody's studying on their own, and somebody befriends them, and a lot of times it's another female. It's an older female, so they may seem more trustworthy or something, but they're really not. And
oh, go ahead, John. I was just going to say that it's my understanding, and it matches up with everything that you're saying. And I'd like for you to tell me a little bit more about your experience with this. But it's my understanding that what's really happening is a lot of these groomers, or whatever the word would be for them, what they're doing is they're looking for those vulnerabilities. So they almost have like an interview process, right? So they meet somebody and they start feeling around and seeing if they have a broken home, or if they're alone a lot, or they have other types of vulnerabilities that are weaknesses that they can exploit. Right. And I've also heard that, these people that are doing this online and chatting and things like that, I mean, they basically keep 3x5 cards, tracking every little thing about these people, what school they go to, what time of day it is at their house, what city they're in, et cetera. How did that play into your research, for the book, learning more about these vulnerabilities?
Yeah. So it really goes back to kind of an unmet need factor, and that factors into vulnerability and risk. And so it generally breaks down into 4 different kinds of areas. One is material, emotional, psychological, and financial. And teenagers, even if you're in a nice home and etc., there's always teenage drama. There's always potentially self-esteem issues.
Right.
Teenagers are notoriously known for not talking to their parents about their problems, right? And so they may turn into an online stranger type of person. And the whole pandemic that we've had over the last 2 years or so, that drove more online activity, more kids isolated, and so it really fed into that. So if you've got this vulnerability, it can result in many different things. It can, and not just human trafficking. So it could be cyberbullying. It could be depression, addiction, suicidal tendencies. If if one of these predators is asking for, say, a topless picture, that can get into, a sextortion type of thing, child pornography, etc. The bullseye is human trafficking. That's kind of one of the worst things that can happen. But there's all kinds of things that can happen that's bad for a teenager, human trafficking is one of them. So it's kind of this broader picture of these issues that kind of feed into it. And one of the things that people, especially my age, don't realize is that if you're 15 years old, you were born in 2007. You never had a world where the internet didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist, smartphones didn't exist. That's how you grew up. And so that's a different world than a lot of, parents that are that didn't, they may be very savvy and tech savvy, and maybe you're great at doing a PowerPoint presentation at your job, but your kid knows all these apps. There's new apps that are coming out all the time.
Right.
And so there's all these different ways that a kid can get in trouble. Now, there's always going to be kids and teenagers that are looking to circumvent parental supervision. But, your child may not be looking for trouble, but I guarantee you trouble is looking for them.
Yeah, one person that I spoke to, they basically made the point that, we teach kids this concept of stranger danger, which is out in the real world. And some people say that's not
Right.
the world's greatest thing because, you do need to be able to ask help from a stranger, et cetera. But trying to teach somebody to be safe out there where there's physical people that could be, talking to, et cetera, is totally different than teaching them that you've got a predator in your pocket. Every one of those apps, every one of those games, everything that has a chat that's on it, people can get a hold of you. And my wife and I, on 2 consecutive days, we actually got texts, which were bots that were trying to send us to, some porn sites and to have us connect with real, people that do acts on camera. And it was so crazy because it was like, I got one and I was like, okay, I'm curious to see, is it going to know anything? But that is happening constantly. And I can't even imagine what kind of world it's like to have that many landmines everywhere. I used to play Fortnite with my son, and I don't know if you're familiar with that game, but when you launch the game, it immediately puts you in a chat room, basically, with 3 other people, right. And you can't turn it off. It's like you as a parent, I would want the ability to go in there and turn that off. And there are so many parents that have no idea that that's even happening. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was say each one of those apps you would have to go into your settings, turn off certain features, and one of them is location settings. So I was doing some research, and there was a situation where a guy showed up at this 11-year-old girl's house. And how did he know where she lived? It wasn't because she gave her address. It's because the location services for Snapchat was on. And he shows up, and
yeah.
And this is an 11-year-old girl. And so that's, that happens all the time. And the stranger danger, as you mentioned, in the old days, that was you're at the park and watch for the strange guy at the edge of the park who's
right.
got a puppy. It says, "Oh, help me find my puppy," and the next thing you know, they're in the guy's car.
Right.
In today's world, a predator could be, targeting your kid while they're sitting at the kitchen table.
That's right.
And that's such a different, a different world. And I was interviewing a school resource officer the other day who was telling me about how, and he works undercover setting up fake profiles.
Oh yeah.
And one of them was he wanted to sort of do a little bit of an experiment, and it gets to a point I want to try to make, which is, so he set up a profile of a good-looking teenage boy, and he sent friend requests to the 20 most popular girls in the school, because school resource officers are basically housed in high schools and middle schools.
Right.
So he sent all these friend requests. 90% of them accepted his request within an hour. Within a week, he had 500 people in the school district as his friend or follower.
Yeah.
And so then a couple of weeks later, he's giving a discussion with the kids, training about online safety, etc. So he tells the kids what he did. So then
Wow.
he goes into the audience and he says, okay, so which one of your friends is me, the fake profile? They had no idea who it was. Part of the problem is a lot of the teens, especially popular teens, they have thousands of friends or followers depending upon the application.
Right.
The problem of that, of course, is how many have they actually met in person that they actually know is maybe a couple hundred. So
Right.
so then you've got these thousands of friends, and then if your friends or this particular, fake profile is friends with all the popular kids, well, of course, everybody else is going to accept your friend request. And so
Yep.
if it's easy, if it's that easy for this officer to set up, then it's easy for a predator to set up.
So I love that story. I mean, as bad as it is, but I love that story as an example. Did you get any feedback as to what were the kids' reactions to this? I mean, were they like surprised? Or were they like, yeah, whatever, because I would hope that they would have been, they would have realized they needed to do something a little different with their, online behavior. But what did he say?
Yeah, the reaction was mixed. Some were surprised, some were concerned. Others, you know how teenagers think they're not
Invincible.
vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
invincible.
Yeah, they are.
And so, some shrugged it off. But, this officer went on to tell me about how he did other fake profiles. So if I could take a minute to tell you another
Sure,
story.
absolutely.
So he set up a fake profile of a 13-year-old teenage girl. And this person was approached almost instantly online. And long story short, the officer went back, chatted with this person, and this person wanted to set up a meeting at a motel for some kind of sexual encounter.
Wow.
The officer repeatedly said, "Hey, I'm only 13. I don't know if I should be doing this." On and on, and thousands of chats back and forth.
Yeah.
And so they eventually arrested this guy. And when they found his electronic devices, they had found that he had sent over 100 messages to random, essentially 12 and 13-year-olds. And that turned out that most did not accept his friend request, but he had 10 people who sent him some kind of nude photo, and 2 of them he had an encounter with at a motel. And so,
wow.
These guys are just going to play the numbers. They're going to throw out as many darts as possible and see what sticks. And luckily, this was an undercover officer who was able to make an arrest.
Wow. That if you're a parent and you're watching this and that doesn't affect you, I really, I don't know what to do. So one of the other things that you had written in your book was the statistics on just what happens to these victims and how much money that they make for these traffickers. And so when we're thinking about these people throwing out so many hooks and getting some fish back in the boat, what is it that a trafficker can expect to make off these people, and how is it, how do these people get victimized? How often is this happening? Maybe you can give some ideas, some statistics for people.
Sure. So globally, it's the number 2 most generating criminal activity after drugs. And in the United States, a trafficker can make up to several $100,000 per person, and that means that they're having an encounter, over 10 times a day on a typical basis. And the average age of, when we've talked about this, there's a lot of different statistics.
Statistics are so hard to get in this field, but the ones that are out there, go for it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think surprises people is that boys are a big portion of the victims out there. They're kind of 45% or so. And so I think a lot of people are surprised about that. And there's one stat that the amount of money generated by traffickers than the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball combined. And that's just a mind-boggling amount of numbers. So, and just so you kind of on an anecdotal basis, when I talked to the law enforcement officer that's profiled in the book, he said that in the Denver metro area, there may be 100 active cases going on. He guessed that there's probably 900 more that they don't know about. So he was estimating just in Denver, which is not the largest city in the country,
Right.
1,000 cases. And what happens a lot is if a trafficker is done with somebody, they really feel that that's a disposable person. And so you may find that person later with a drug overdose or suicide, and you just don't know if that person's had trafficking experience. And
Right.
one of the problems is that they just view these kids as commodities. And then the stats that I've researched has come out to be that over 50% are in that kind of very young age, and so you're getting a lot of people who are not savvy in the world. If you're a teenager, even if you're 18 or 19, you're still not really savvy with the way the world works. And many do come from broken homes or are in the foster system. And if you're a runaway, there's stats that typically within 48 hours, you are approached by a trafficker, because the number one reason that someone will sell their body is for shelter and food. I mean, those are, which is
Yep.
obviously the basic things that people need.
Yep.
And so if you're a runaway, that's typically the thing you need the most. And so they truly prey on that vulnerability.
Yeah, it's the more that I had learned about trafficking in the beginning, the more the unmet needs and the vulnerabilities became like super obvious to me. I'm like going, and so when you're out there looking to see if you can help somebody or try to help them, prevent this from happening to them, it's like trying to pay attention to those vulnerabilities. And then of course there's all the red flags, and you list a few of those, in your book. And I had a couple other questions I was going to ask. So like we sort of talked a little bit about this. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the different types of trafficking and what people can do. Maybe you could explain just a couple of red flags and what it is that people could be, looking for in their family or their friends of their family.
Sure. So, and these can indicate more than just a trafficking situation.
Right, because trafficking is like the bullseye to all these just horrible situations.
Right. So one of those things is if you notice a teen, and again, it might not be your child, but it could be someone on your kid's soccer team, or that the kid who never speaks up in class if you're a teacher. If all of a sudden they've got unexplained gifts, or especially a second cell phone, that generally means something's unusual.
Right.
And there's some kind of secret or something going on there. And if they've got secret friends or secret boyfriends, especially if they're older, that's definitely a big warning sign. Other warning signs are common with other things. So if they're all of a sudden dropping grades, or they quit extracurricular activities, they have a bunch of new friend groups,
right.
They're dressing differently, they're talking differently. Maybe if they talk about sex, they'll say something that it's no big deal, or this is what everyone's doing, those kinds of things. And that can indicate a lot of other things, but those are definitely some of the obvious warning signs,
right,
that something's going on.
So I know you do in-person events, and so you're giving groups talks. So I know that you said that while you were you were wanting to get into this field, you started learning more about this stuff, and things became more obvious to you. You wanted to tell stories, and obviously now it's like you want to try to go make a difference. So when you're putting together those events, I mean, what is it that drove you to go ahead and actually make that happen?
Yeah. So what I have put together is I'll talk about trafficking as kind of this. I'm assuming you don't know a whole lot, and we're going over stats, figures. What are some of the stories, and why did I write this particular story or that particular chapter?
Right.
What am I trying to reveal in the story? But at least half of my presentation is talking about how do you keep your kids safe? You know, some of these stories of like the undercover police officer, and how are the predators targeting the kids online? You know, one of the first things I say on how to protect your kids is, do they know your phone number by heart? And in the old days, I knew a lot of phone numbers. Now I barely know anyone's because it's in your contact database. You know, it used to be on speed dial in older phones. Well, now nobody knows phone numbers. So
Isn't that the
not
truth?
only, yeah, and so not only is that helpful if your phone, as you know, the battery's dead and you need a ride, but what if you're actually in real trouble? And so I put that little tidbit into my story about how a girl had an opportunity but couldn't remember a phone number. And so that's a real tip. And you know, another big tip is the friends. You know, if you have thousands of friends, I think that just translates to more risk. And so,
Good point.
you know, being an active parent, not only, okay, let's get rid of these friends who are not really friends, but then the people you actually know, well, who are they? What are they doing? You know, there's an old saying that you become what your friends are. And are your friends helping you become a better person, or are they dragging you in a bad direction?
Right.
So it goes back to basic parenting, being an involved parent, because you can't just give your kid a laptop, a phone, and say, here's the babysitter, here's the entertainment, I'll see you in a couple hours.
Right.
And unfortunately, with people's busy lives and the way that, you know, kids grow up in technology, you know, kids are online, you know, maybe as part of their classroom curriculum. You know, and I was talking to an officer, and typically by the time the kid is in first grade, they're online in some capacity. And by the time they're in fourth or fifth grade, they're almost not supervised at all.
It's unbelievable.
And so it's no wonder that something is going to go awry, whether it's completely innocent, they may stumble on it, as you said, like a pornography website, or someone's actually being a predator and going after them. So as a parent, you need to not only be involved, but you also need to see what they're doing online. You should be having the password. You're the parent. You own this phone.
Right.
Don't give the kid the password. You own the password, and understand not only what they're downloading, but then when they do have that application, go and check some of the settings and some of the activity that's in the chat room and etc. So you really have to be diligent. You can't just say, oh, this is a kid's game, or this is a child's app, or it's got some kind of protection. You have to check on that all the time on a regular and consistent basis. So you have to do that, because these predators are going to be on those kinds of apps. And if anybody puts a chat or puts something like, I'm having a terrible day, I hate my parents, I'm thinking a runaway, those are like antennas to a predator who's going to see, okay, that's who I'm going to talk about, or that's who I'm going to go target now.
Right. Wow, that is an awful lot of really good information all packed into that. And I was going to say, as you were discussing that, it really makes me like hyper aware that we have, you know, kids that were born, like you said, in 2007. They've always had the internet. They've always had smartphones. And, you know, I come from, and I think you and I are pretty close to the same generation. I had to learn all this stuff myself, and I'm actually trying to pay attention to everything. And I know there's a lot of parents that are my age, and they don't even know how to use a computer. They don't know what an app is. They certainly don't understand that there's chat things in apps and games like that. And it's almost overwhelming for somebody to have to start figuring that out. It's like they have to go to school to even know what questions to ask. So I think we're in a really disadvantaged situation where we have parents that don't really get it, and the kids that live in this stuff, and, you know, whether they want to or not. I have two kids, and they were when they were going through school, they kept telling me, we want smartphones. We want smartphones. Everybody has one. I'm like going, well, then just use theirs. You know, we got them flip phones, and they didn't like having a flip phone. That wasn't cool enough. So they didn't even want anything to do with that. But I mean, you know, you have people that are giving their 2-year-olds these phones, and, you know, like you had mentioned, I think there's a stat one time that like 80% or more of children have an online presence by the time they're, you know, 8 months old, 6 months old, or something like that. So it's like, you know, we're already putting kids' faces and names and attaching them to us, and, you know, it's really scary. And of course, the parents need to understand that about privacy settings too. You know, who are your friends, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a big deal, and that's one of the things that I wind up talking to parents about when we do conferences, is that your job right now, because you care about this, is to be an active, involved parent and spend more time with your children. There is no magic answer to this. It's, you have to put in the hard work to get your children's trust and get them to listen to you. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, because in the old days you'd pop in a video and sit them in front of the TV,
Right.
and now they're online, so it's actually a worse situation.
Yeah, exactly. It is. So so I'm thinking about your workshops. I want to talk a little bit about those, and I don't want to take up too much of your time doing this, because I don't know how many people want to watch for more than an hour. So I'm just trying to be honest about it. So I'm thinking about your workshops, right? So I'm really big on that, because you're getting a chance to speak to people and learn more about their situations and throw out some good information. So when I'm thinking about a workshop, what is it that makes people want to go to a workshop? Do you think that there's something going on in their life? They're just curious? You know, what is it that drives people to actually attend a workshop on this topic?
I think parents are definitely concerned about online predators and what's going on. It's getting worse than it was a year ago, than it was 5 years ago, etc. So I think they want to learn about that, as well as what are the tactics that predators use online. And so that's why I tell some of these stories about an SRO and what some of that undercover work is going and happening, so people understand some of those tactics, so they can, you know, be armed with more information. And, you know, it really begs the question, is social media really safe or not? And it's, well, kind of not really.
No, you're right. It's a dangerous tightrope walk that people have. And I have so many comments about that. My daughter wrote us a blog about, you know, how she felt ultimately unsatisfied with being online and felt kind of lonely. So now she's spending a lot more time with her close group of friends in real life, you know. But, you know, everybody doesn't have that opportunity, obviously. There was something else I was going to ask. So when somebody is at a training, you know, I guess, like you said, they're interested in learning more about this. I kind of want to just take a little bit of a digression. I just spoke to a group, and they do training inside of schools, and they said they went to a town. Well, it's a village. I think they had 500 people in the village, and they were giving a talk at the school. And when they had finished their presentation for the school, the principal came up and said, and they didn't know this beforehand. The principal said, you know, a couple of weeks ago, there was a bust in our city, and they found out there were 10 children that were being trafficked out of a 500-person town.
Wow.
And I mean, that blew me away. And they said that 5 of the victims were actual, or survivors, depending on how you look at it. They're actually in attendance. So it's like, how do we get the information out there to the rest of those 500 people that don't really quite get it? How do we make them interested in learning about this topic that is what my friends call radioactive? So do you have any thoughts on how we can actually wake them up?
Well, I think it needs to start with awareness.
I have found, just from a marketing perspective, that I'm getting more people interested when you start saying practical advice for parents, warning signs, those kinds of tips. What does an undercover officer want to hear, or want you to know? So, human trafficking is a very serious subject, but a lot of people don't want to hear about it. They don't think it's as big of a problem as it is. But I think everybody knows, yeah, online safety is an issue for, I mean, anybody. The elderly can get tricked or fished. There's always, emails and adults. The guy who says, "Oh, I need to. I got all this money in a Nigerian bank account, and only you can help me."
I have a friend whose parents fell for that, and they gave a guy $250,000 of, well, it was their entire retirement, the whole thing.
Yeah. So it's and that's horrible, and it's not just kids, But one of the things that I'm telling parents who go to this is that in today's modern age, childhood sexual abuse, trafficking, and pornography are merging into one. And there was a headline recently about how Pornhub was being sued because they had underage and they had trafficked victims.
Right.
And they landed up taking, I want to say, over half of their videos off of the website because of this lawsuit. So it really is kind of merging into one kind of one evil thing.
Yeah, I have a friend who's an adolescent addiction specialist, and obviously a lot of the stuff that he deals with is drugs and things like that. But he had a client come in, and it was a 10-year-old boy who just came straight in there. His parents dropped him off, and he's like, "I'm addicted to pornography," and I'm like, first of all, what? And then second of all, he knew it, and he was willing to discuss it with someone. So, I mean, we have some real problems. And of course, if for those of you that don't really understand this, as a parent, you cannot stop your kid from going to websites that are completely unacceptable. So this is a parenting moment, an opportunity you have to teach your kids, what's right and what's wrong, and how to stay away from that type of stuff. And to get away from it if they wind up on it. It has so many different detrimental effects, obviously, but the fact that it actually continues to fuel this desire, for having sex with, the wrong people, I guess would be one way to say it, out of a relationship and not in a loving scenario. We have generations of problems, and I don't know how we're going to deal with all that stuff. I'm just trying to be super honest about it. It's a huge mess right now.
Yeah, because that 10-year-old, we're talking about a 5th grader.
Yeah.
And I think back to when I was in 5th grade, and that those kinds of problems didn't exist.
No.
And it's something that parents really have to limit time that's online, really be involved now more than ever. And unfortunately, there's a lot of cultural things working against parents. We talked about some of it, the technology, drug use, any kind of unstable home life it always negatively affects the kids.
Right.
But if they're going online to find friends or to find affirmation for anything, that those cultural influences are making things worse. And if you have a daughter who's 10 or 12 years old, it's hard to go to the stores to find any age appropriate outfits. And so you're seeing childhood become less and less number of years. You're seeing the sexualization of children in multiple ways. I mean, there's that show on Netflix called Cuties, which was a bunch of 11-year-olds jumping around. I read articles on that. And so, the most overused headline in society is celebrity wears revealing outfit. I mean, that's a daily occurrence. And so what does that tell young girls? It says, well, that's what you ought to do. Yep. That's how you have value. That's how you get attention. So what does that tell young boys? Well, it says, well, that's what girls do. That's what they're for. And that's what I expect from my classmates and et cetera. So it's sending the wrong message to both boys and girls.
Yeah, it is.
And so unless a parent is there to correct that, explain that, it's making it a lot more difficult, let alone, lyrics and songs and things like that, based upon when I used to grow up, any kind of sexual stuff was innuendo and roundabouts, and it wasn't explicit. Now it's explicit. And,
it is.
And so the, childhood is ending much quicker than it used to.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the all the cultural stuff that's out there, pop culture, music, etc. I mean, even it's in television, movies. I mean, like if they just kind of drop the fact that somebody's being prostituted like constantly, that you hear, shows like Pimp My Ride. I mean, it's in music everywhere. The pimp culture is actually celebrated. I never thought I would sound like such a prude, honestly, but it's like this is a critical issue that is happening to our culture. I have one question I wanted to ask you before I asked you about explaining more about your classes and where somebody can get a hold of you. And I can't think of it right off the top of my head now, so let me just go ahead and skip right past that. And so I want to make sure that if somebody is really interested in learning more about what you do, trying to find you, where can somebody find you? Where are you online? What is the best way to get a hold of you? Lay it out for us.
Sure. So the first thing would be to read the stories in the book, because I think a lot is revealed, but it's done in an interesting way.
It is.
And as an author, if somebody doesn't want to turn the page and find out what happens next, then it doesn't really matter what you're saying, because they'll just tune it out. Right. So the book is selling on Amazon, and I also have a website if somebody wants a signed copy, and that website is www.itisnotabout.com. And so also on my website, there's a tab for speaking, which shows events. And so I'm actively trying to set up as many events as possible. And most of them are local for me in Colorado, but I am going out of state. I am trying to contact as many people as possible. And, it's interesting how some people just don't even want to hear about it. They're not interested in all. Others are very enthusiastic and will want to have me come and present. The training is generally about an hour. So there's a lot of information packed in there.
Right.
But, it's not like you're taking a 2-day class or something that you got to invest a lot of time. And so those are really the best ways to do it. And in the back of the book, there is this what you can do section, as well as some of those tips. The presentation, obviously, if I have time to talk, I go into more detail. I can give some of these stories of the undercover police officer, because I was surprised about a lot of stuff. Now, my kids are adults now, so I'm not in parenting mode. So I'm a little out of it as far as what's going on in schools today as much. But I think anybody who listens to that is going to find out some things that they hadn't heard of, and most of it is not going to be cheery. It's not going to be a feel-good type of message,
right?
Because there are going to be kids just like in the old days that are going to rebel, and there are apps out there that can spoof your GPS. So you have, the parent has Find My Friend or some kind of app, and it looks like you're in the library or you're at your friend's house. And in fact, the GPS is spoofed somewhere else. There's programs to hide pictures. Right. And so they have these secret vaults. There's a calculator app.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one.
Yeah, it works like a real calculator. So I'm told, but it has all these secret folders and things like that. And, just one of the headlines from this month was how at the end of the school year, this kid was being bullied in middle school, and 20 kids were passing around a topless photo of this girl. Middle schoolers, right? So by definition, that's child pornography.
Yes, it is. And if you send it through a phone, that's a whole different other lawsuit. Or I think it's a federal crime because you're sending child pornography over the internet.
Yeah, and especially if your contacts are anywhere. Now, one of the practical things that people don't think about is, well, kids lose phones all the time. What if that phone is lost and a predator? They love to buy used phones, mine those phones for data, and now they've found this girl's picture that they can go and sell or use or however insidious purpose they have. And people don't think about that. Don't sell any teenager's phone.
Yeah, that's true.
Because again, your kid could be an angel. As I'm sure our kids are, angels.
Oh, perfect.
They never made a mistake.
Never. No one's ever made a mistake as a child, ever.
But somebody may have sent some, or they may be in some group chat that they maybe never looked at, and there could be stuff on there. So,
right.
Stolen and used phones, predators love buying those things because they can mine that for pictures.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about geotagging and things like that, and I wanted to mention something as well, which is that photos have geolocation on them too. So it's possible that you can just take a photo and put it up on Snapchat, and if Snapchat doesn't have the location service on it, the photo may have that, and so you would probably wind up with the same thing with these pictures on phones. It's just it tells you exactly where it was taken, when it was taken, etc. So I did remember my question I wanted to ask you. So as I started getting into this, and you may run into this at your events, but my normal human trafficking focused friends, they look at the statistics of trafficking and they see the numbers that are, the estimates are just so high up there. And then they look at the actual conviction rate, and the disparity is unbelievable. I mean, like you're looking at thousands, of people that are actually getting prosecuted. Around the world at any given time. And in states, the numbers are horrible, but the number of people that are actually getting rescued and found and or having a case, brought against them, or the people that they're with, those numbers are just low too. Why do you think the disparity is there?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some good news in this front. There's more nonprofits than ever. There's more awareness than ever. Laws are getting stronger. However, it's easier for predators to avoid law enforcement. You can get cheap burner phones. You can set up profiles, every day if you want to.
Right. And
so it's easy to stay undetected, unfortunately. And law enforcement, there's always a lack of resources.
Right.
And so especially in smaller towns and suburbs where they're just more patrol officers dealing with what's happening on the streets, that there may not be a lot of resources in medium-sized cities, say, as an example. And unless they're finding things that are referred to them maybe by the courts. One of the stats that I heard was that somebody could be seen up to 9 times and not be identified as a trafficking victim. And that can be all kinds of government agencies. A lot of times the victim is psychologically manipulated. They may not see themselves as a victim.
Right.
And they may just think, well, I'm in partnership with my pimp, and this is what I do to help provide money. And so they may not see themselves as the victim. And they may be scared to go to the police. A lot of times the pimps will make them do petty crimes. They may shoplifting or other kinds of things, and then threaten them to say that, well, if you get busted, they're going to find out all about these other things that you've done. And so, I think the trend in law enforcement is to be more aware and to focus on if somebody's picked up for shoplifting, maybe there's a story behind there. And it could be domestic violence. It could be all kinds of things. So I think they're getting more training and more awareness on that. So that's good. But technology is definitely helping the criminal these days.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off today, or at least sign off the interview?
No, I think we covered a lot of really good stuff. I think that, one of the things that people will always say is that if you suspect something, if you see a pimp, do not attempt to go and confront a pimp. There's national hotlines that maybe you can flash on the screen. So those are generally very responsive. But if you just see somebody who looks like they're in trouble, ask them if they need help. Ask them if they know the hotline number. Ask them if there's anything that they want or need or want to talk to somebody, because they may be in a situation where they're in a store and their pimp is waiting outside and you're sitting in line with them at McDonald's. Right. And maybe there's an opportunity to try to help somebody, but definitely, don't go after pimps. A lot of these guys are in gangs. They do not value life, and you definitely get into. You don't want to put yourself in danger,
right?
But you want to try to, somebody in that situation wants to know, bottom line, that somebody else cares.
That's right.
So, be that person who cares.
That's a great thing to end on. I certainly appreciate that. So if anybody is out there and they're looking to get a hold of John, go to itisnotabout.com, and that covers his book. It's Not About the Badge, and It's Not About the Sex. These are important books. Our culture is in dire need of people with the wisdom and people that are spreading it out there. John, thank you so much. We appreciate everything, and we will talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Okay.